Marco here. I have been reading some Ricardo Piglia, and I will make a video on Piglia at some point. Piglia has sent me on many digressions, and what he landed on that inspired me to make a video now is Macedonio Fernandez, who is most known for being Jorge Luis Borges' mentor. He was a friend of Borges' dad, and when Borges came home from Europe in 1921, and he had all of these ideas and influences and things that he soaked up. I believe he lived in Switzerland for a few years, and he traveled around in Europe, and he was particularly enamored by the ideas of Schopenhauer and Bergson. Interesting to Borges was that when he returned to Buenos Aires, he found that a lot of these ideas was sort of reached independently by Fernandez. Macedonio Fernandez was a lawyer, was born in 1874, and died in 1954, I believe. He later would go on and read Schopenhauer and Bergson and William James, and these were like sort of the main things that he would read. Borges said that it seemed like he would read little else. Borges, he wrote an autobiographical essay. He says, perhaps the major event of my return was Macedonio Fernandez. Of all the people I have met in my life, and I met some quite remarkable men, no one has ever made so deep and so lasting an impression on me as Macedonio. A tiny figure in a black bowler hat, he was waiting for us on the Darcena Norte when we landed, and I came to inherit his friendship from my father. Both men had been born in 1874. Paradoxically, Macedonio was an outstanding conversationalist, and at the same time a man of long silences and few words. We met on Saturday evenings at a café, De Perla, in the Plaza de Roncha, where we would talk till daybreak, Macedonio presiding. As in Madrid, Cancinos had stood for all learning, Macedonio now stood for pure thinking. At the time, I was a great reader and went out very seldom. Almost every night after dinner I used to go to bed and read, but my whole week was lit up with the expectation that on Saturday I'd be seeing and hearing Macedonio. He lived quite near us, and I could have seen him whenever I wanted, but I somehow felt that I had no right to that privilege, and that in order to give Macedonio Saturdays its full value, I had to forego him throughout the week. At these meetings, Macedonio would speak perhaps 3 or 4 times, risking only a few quiet observations which were addressed, seemingly, to his neighbor alone. These remarks were never affirmative. Macedonio was very courteous and soft-spoken, and would say, for example, "Well, I suppose you've noticed," and thereupon he would let loose some striking, highly original thought. But invariably, he attributed his remark to the hearer. He also says here, charming what's mentioned, but I just want to point out, as a writer, Macedonio published several rather unusual volumes, and papers of his are still being collected, close to 20 years after his death. His first book, published in 1928, was called We're Not Always Awake When Our Eyes Are Open. It was an extended essay on idealism, written in a deliberately tangled and crabbed style, in order, I suppose, to match the tangledness of reality. But here, for all of his brilliance, I don't think Macedonio is to be found in his writings at all. The real Macedonio is in his conversation. And this is interesting because Borges and others, I suppose, they worked a lot on creating this myth of Macedonio. You could find, and probably still find, intellectuals in Argentina that would know lots of very interesting and wild anecdotes of stories where Macedonio would run for president in absence. He would just leave notes throughout the city that said Macedonio. They would tell stories of him wanting to create an utopian commune, and then he gave up on the first day because of mosquitoes. And Borges in particular, he was very outspoken and open about his relationship with Macedonio in the early years. But they had a falling out. After that point, Borges seemed to want to distance himself from Macedonio and his influence, and you see it sort of in this autobiographical essay where he says that his brilliance was all in conversation. And interestingly enough, even after this falling out where Borges was distancing himself from Macedonio, they continued to correspond for many, many years. And in 2000, there was published a collection of the correspondences between Borges and Macedonio. And it gets a little confused. I've been reading some papers, and people are saying that people have underestimated how big the influence was, that Borges would deny how big the influence was, and at the same time, there are some quotes where Borges speaks very openly about how big the influence was. Macedonio's funeral was in 1952, and Borges delivered a eulogy, and he said, "In those years I imitated him to the point of transcription, to the point of devout and passionate plagiarism. I felt Macedonio is metaphysics. Macedonio is literature." And I'll come back to this point. So what happened was I was reading the diaries of Emilio Renzi by Riccardo Piglia. It's a very excellent diary. This is sort of it's called the formative years. So we get a lot of his college time where he'll share some notes about some author he's read. And you get a lot of sort of summarizing of his insights, sort of how he understands certain philosophical ideas, how he reads Henry James and tries to take apart James's technique. It's fascinating. It's an education, and particularly in Latin American literature. I've picked up some good tips from this. But what happened was that when I had read maybe 150 pages of this, I just stopped and I was like, okay, I got to read some Riccardo Piglia. So I read The Absent City, which was an excellent book, one that I read as an ebook because I was stuck at a hotel and I needed something. But I'm gonna buy a physical copy of it and everything else I can find by Piglia because it was very, very excellent. And in the book, there's lots of references to Joyce, and in the afterword, he sort of compares Macedonio, Fernandez, and James Joyce, and sort of draws the parallels between Joyce and Shakespeare, and Macedonio and Cervantes, and I got curious, so I started looking into him, and then I found the Museum of Eterna's novel, The First Good Novel, which is Open Letter Press book. It's translated by Margaret Schwartz, and this is apparently Macedonio's magnum opus. This was you get some different numbers if you read the preface here, where he says that this was worked upon in over 27 years. Piglia claims that he worked on it for 41 years. Piglia did meet Borges on a few occasions. I don't know if he met Macedonio. Probably not. I think Piglia rose to prominence a little late for that. But whether it was 27 or 41 years doesn't really matter. What we do learn from the preface, though, is that Macedonio would write a whole lot of manuscripts, and he would, never care to publish them. Wouldn't care really too much of what happened with them. He would leave them when he moved. The story of Macedonio was that I think the year before Borges came back from Switzerland, Macedonio's wife died, and he quit his job as a lawyer. He had a doctorate in jurisprudence, and the kids moved to grandparents and family, and he started living in boarding houses. He would move around a lot until I think he got like a sort of patroness who took care of him while he would dedicate his time to writing and thinking and conversing. We get this quote here. I was born a porteño, and in the very 1874 sort of year, shortly thereafter, though not at first, I began to be cited by a certain Jorge Luis Borges, and with such unabashed commendation that, thanks to the risks incurred by his vehemence, I became the author of his best work. And it's hinted at here that Macedonio invented Borges as much as Borges invented Macedonio, and the difference is that people are more likely to read Borges than Macedonio. And there is a very strong parallel between Macedonio's metaphysics and his idea about the novel and the self and the writer that, in a certain sense, Borges adopted and in some cases changed. And in many ways, Borges inverts the poetics of this book in his story, Tlønukbar Tertius Orbis. I'll get back to it after I've talked a little bit about the book, which is not easy. It's a difficult book, but it's very interesting and complex, and very much ahead of its time. To describe the structure of it a little bit, it starts out with 56 prologues, and it sort of speaks about novels and characters and readers, and he describes characters. There are no characters that are truly embodied in this book. All the characters are archetypes. They move on and live in other novels. He refers to them by names like the lover, sweetheart, maybe genius. He called because he talks a lot about how its authors should not try to write about genius, because how could they unless they're a genius themselves? So he creates the archetype of the maybe genius that, it's hard to tell. And we have lots of strange ones here. We have here a prologue that has no text, except that it has a footnote to the subheading of The Man Who Feigned to Live. It goes on for 3 pages. We start to anticipate the story, and we muse and talk about the possibilities and of the story, and so what eventually will be the story actually starts. It kind of sneaks. He sneaks in seeds of the novel in these prologues, and he alludes to some of the things that will happen. He comes finally to a point here where he says, "Where are those prologues, and is this the novel?" And the answer is both yes and no to both questions. They were prologues, and they were kind of not prologues, and what follows is it's definitely not a novel. It is the most postmodern before postmodernism, most self-reflexive, self-aware, and self-problematizing book I've ever read, I think. He writes well. He can write quite movingly, but it is also a book full of artifice. And I want to read a couple of these prologues, and to some of the points that he raises in this. Here we have a bit of a false start. What I have here is, strangely enough, now the promised novel, which certainly had the instinct of assuring itself a state of effective non-existence. It hasn't emerged from non-being because a promised book traces the border between being and non-being, and from a distant perspective, such as the mind of the author. Its place in existence is being prepared, and energy, curiosity, and attention are reserved for it, even promising it so much existent that juries have reserved prices for it, and it has the instinct of maintaining itself in this non-existence for half dozens years so that it can appear as if it being had never known nothingness, which, doubling the virtue of its reality, makes possible such an abundance thereof, that, in a fantasy, non-existence lives in the person of the gentleman who doesn't exist, whose insinuated substance is only effective, can only breathe, whose slender shadow can only have a place in a novel whose existence is as strong as this one, whose beginning has not been preceded by nothing. I'll say goodbye here too, reader, not because you can ever forget me. You can't. This is an unforgettable novel. But because I'm just a poor novel, ardent but short on tremulous dreams, a little curtain of shadows that has been decided to pull itself back as to reveal everything, assuming you begin to read it. Sweetheart, the president, gentleman who doesn't exist, Eterna, is not on the same path. The sad being characters only live in the minutes that someone spends writing them. Once their making is concluded, they are concluded. They are nothing. They're even sadder now because the ticklish feeling of being read ran over their dead figures like a butterfly, or disquieting pearls of laughter, or even the piety that you will disgorge it gave them goosebumps all over their bodies because they never had access to life. My novel has been executed without life, and yet it's not to be forgotten. My novel has been executed without life, and yet it's not to be forgotten. It's worse that way, even sadder, even more pitiless. You who are eternal, the living, are those who can weep for it, since you have touched life and there is no death when there is a present, a single instant of life followed by eternity. You can cry, your tears burn your face, they run, they wet your cheeks. I, the novel, am only made of daydreams, and the day you dream of me, you'll forget me. I'll be over forever, and I'll end each time that because he's happy, because he's triumphant, he doesn't dream me. Meanwhile, you will never forget existing. So this touches upon a couple of the main themes of the book. The first part is a bit of an autobiographical tidbit. Borges discovered Macedonio, and the world was told of him many years before he published. He was straddling this space of successful unpublished author. So we get a bit of a nod to that there. And then next, we get a little bit of the characters and this problem of what characters are and their limitations and you know, some commentary on what books really are. The sort of struggle Macedonio has an aesthetic, and he prescribes how you should deal with this problem of characters who are unable to live, and he prescribes how you should write about them. And a struggle for life is what sort of the characters, when the book starts to unfold in chapters instead of prologues, is sort of about that. And here we have a little commentary on the archetypicalness of his characters. A character before her first appearance. I want to know what kind of people I've ended up with here. Nobody who isn't worthy of it. Eterna, the lover, the president. But you should know, Mr. Author, that I can't learn anymore, and I can't teach anything to anyone else. Sometimes I'm called Mignon in Wilhelm Meister. But if we have Eterna here, who was called Leonora in Poe, and the one who was called Rebecca in Ivanhoe, and our own Eterna finds herself in Lady Rowena, when will I find my own great novelist? Haven't you found him here? But look, your novel doesn't have a hermetic seal, but it leads the way to another novel, because I'm transmigrating character, and I arise not from the reader's posterity, but out of an author's posterity. Let's leave it at this. Behave yourself for me. For the rest of it, I don't believe the authors of the future will be content with used characters, but this is my concern. We have an understanding. He does sort of a good way of teasing us a little bit and giving us this impression of the archetypicalness of his characters, and then we do fall into the trap of projecting personalities on them and treat them as their own characters until the book sort of dissolves into postmodern commentary on itself towards the end. Then we have a couple of prologues on the reader. He says, I'm confident that I won't have a single orderly reader. An orderly reader could bring about my downfall and strip me of any celebrity I've more or less honestly managed to swipe for my characters. And failure is a dubious distinction at my age. To the reader who skips around, however, I accommodate myself. You read my entire novel without knowing it because I scattered the telling of the whole novel before I started, and so you turned into an unknowing orderly reader. With me, the reader who skips around is most likely to read it in an orderly fashion. I wanted to distract you, not correct you, because contrary to appearances, you are a wise reader, since you practice interreading, which makes the most forceful impression, in keeping with my theory that characters and events that are only insinuated or skillfully truncated are the most memorable. You, in turn, should be grateful to me for a new sensation, reading in order. On the other hand, the orderly reader will experience a new way of skipping, the orderly reading of a skipping around author. Just want to give you a few more tidbits too. When something one can compare to plot starts taking place, we have the president who is taking all of these characters to a stanza called La Novela, and the president wants to try to live for the happiness and of his companions, and like to live only for a friendship, and that is how they all get to this stanza. But trouble arises as he finds that it isn't enough to have friendship, and that's where this struggling for life exists, and starts discussing on the personal, the metaphysical struggles of the characters. And the president is writing some version of the novel that we are writing, and the president being a character is also probably an allusion to Macedonio's run for president in absence that he did in his that I talked about in the beginning. And so, yeah, we get all that metafiction in a very early novel. There are even characters who, like the president has a cook that was so upset of not being included in the novel that the cook moved out and started a cafeteria by the train station to waylay readers, and they would not get to come and read the book because they were busy at the cafeteria. So it's very funny and intellectually very interesting. I want to read some of the some highlights from these musings. There's lots going on here that I won't go into, but the thing that Macedonio tries to do, what he tries to do is to create pure fiction out of Buenos Aires. Once the conquest was concluded, it was left to the mystery to reveal to the president the most singular fact of any city, of which he was the only witness. I have on good authority that on a certain day of the year of 1938, and during a period of mere living, of frivolity, when it happened that the body of Alfonsina Storni reached death's waters, the city displaced itself, spinning instead on her axis by moving a few centimeters. The president, still perplexed as to whether this urban gyration was a plea, don't die, or a sorrowful approval of a dreaded and sad refusal of life, knows that thanks to this occurrence in the sensibility of the heart of a city, at that instant of the death of this dreamer's soul, Buenos Aires entered the mystery. Here the characters have like a little discussion about existence and life. I feel the sadness of this short existence that we have in the novel. I want to leave home to be in truth. Sweetheart, what you say frightens and worries me. You really think yourself so bereft of life? No, sweetheart, I exist and I love it because I've met you. Do we suffer from the desperation that there's nothing that can give us life? after I so graciously, so sweetly encountered you here, you who arrived so unexpectedly where I was, you whose arrival was so directly for me, and when we met at the gate, and now we've spent so much time in each other's company. You're such a friend, so courteous. And you? I wish we had experienced something of life. Sweetheart, we're not unreal. If we were, we'd be smoking like characters in movies. We will have life, we'll keep asking for it, and we're the same as all of those with life who find themselves facing death. This slim, moribund being who begs for life and gestures and words and in reality doesn't feel pain from losing it, nor does he even believe that he has stopped living. Author, you're making me uncomfortable. What an itch you've got to exist. Who would have thought that characters of mine, this has never happened to another author. Lots of them write contented characters like Hamlet, Sigismundo. Characters who incline towards not being. I, on the other hand, am confronted with this vital craving. Reader, what an inconvenience. Where will I read you if you go to life instead? Please leave a forwarding address. Also, what more do you want than to be agreeable to life? Also, I object that the title of the character bore no warning, in which my appalling desperation, which no one imagined, is revealed. Author, you flatter me, sir. If it weren't for my character's cravings, I'd be so happy to have readers like you. What a beautiful, most complete desperation I've thought up, don't you think? Reader, the characters pain me, but I exist. Is there another chapter that wants to live? If there is, I'm not reading anymore. There's no spectacle so uncomfortable. How can I expect you to grasp my great idea? Nevertheless, I can't predict that what my characters crave. I only know that they're going to say and do. You yourself, reader, are here a part of my work, and yet, here, yes, but for myself. I see that you like to live, and for this reason I must not bring you up or let you talk here anymore, unless it's to fall in love with Sweetheart for yourself. I have the power to create appearance and death, to reign over all of this, and yet there's something on the earth whose soul wants to be mended, and I can't do it. Metaphysician. This is a lot of tangling, phantasmagoric tangling between characters, reader and author. And it's not that they pretend to get tangled up. They themselves don't know what they are. This won't resolve everything. They're all real. Any image in a mind is reality and lives. The world's reality is all just an image of the mind. Affection is not an image, pleasure, pain. Existence is not pre-desirable, and the pre-desire to be, there is already a being. What there isn't is a beginning, the not having been, from which situation we began desiring existence. Author, I don't doubt it, just try and extinguish it. Now you cease in my mind and in the novel, so it can go on. Begone, Professor of Being, exist no more. Wait, don't rub me out yet. We can't be more than one image in a mind, in form and body. To appear in a mind is to be born. Author, flee, metaphysician. You are ruined by frustration like everything else. Metaphysician, call me on your 11th hour when you need an illusion. I've got your 11th hour right here. I won't write you anymore. Stop it. Interestingly, previously he included us in the book very indirectly by discussing the types of reader, the type that skips around and the orderly reader. And now this is the first time where we are actually put into the book and given dialogue. And at one point we return and we get cut off by other readers who disagree with us. And after this discussion on metaphysics and what it is to exist, we also get some characters who try to create art and to read themselves and experience a little flutter of air in their lungs from creating existence themselves. The act of reading is creating reality, and this book was very fun, and I like it. I've tried to talk about this book, and it's difficult. This is my third attempt, and I have read snippets of the book over and over. I've skipped around and read, and I find that the more time I spend with the book, the more I like it. Even though there is a great artifice to this book, it is so self-aware that I know a lot of readers are tired of that. I know that a lot of people felt that, or many readers feel still, that sort of postmodernism, metafiction has played itself out. That it was cute once, but now it's sort of like a dead end. It doesn't take us anywhere. But I really find it interesting to take it serious and sort of try to imagine what is happening when you take it seriously. Like when reading John Barth, for example, On with the Story and Other Stories, or what it's called, there's a point where boy is looking at a woman on a beach and she's reading a book, and a page comes loose of that book and it flies away in the wind, and the boy picks the page up and he starts reading on it, and one of the things he reads is the page number. And when you know Barth, you skip ahead to that page, and just to make sure that your suspicion is true, and that in fact she was reading the same book that you're reading. Like it was a page of the book that she's in. And I know that it's sort of gimmicky. It's not the most compelling example of this, but to me, I feel connected by those moments. I feel like it places the book in the real world, and it sort of reminds me that I exist in the same world as the author, and that this is references to the world and what reading is, and what we do through the act of reading. And I think that this is a very good book in that. Well, some of the ideas in Macedonio Fernandez's book aren't necessarily new. We find influences by Schopenhauer and Bergson and William James. What he does do is he takes these ideas and creates drama out of them. It becomes very well-written thought experiments. We have the struggle of these characters, where we have these characters who have very real experiences of what Schopenhauer calls the two types of ethical behavior, the affirmation and the denial of the will to life. We see how Macedonio conceives of this, and how if the world exists only as representation, then what exists within a book. He sort of, much in like how Barth will use some of his postmodern tricks to zoom in and out and sort of enlarge the lens of attention. Macedonio will play with these ideas in a world where he can be very literal with them. He can draw out what the consequences of the reality of these ideas would entail. The ones I will truly recommend this book for are to fans of Jorge Luis Borges. One thing that is very striking about Tlön Ukbar Orbis Tertius, after having read Macedonia, is that it seems very strange that Macedonia should be absent from it. Instead, Borges casts his friend Bioy Sasares, who is a friend and important to Borges, of course. But whereas Macedonio tries to change Buenos Aires into fiction, Borges has fiction creep into and take over the world, and I think that Borges is the superior writer. I won't claim that Macedonio replaces the need for Borges. I just think that Borges could not have reached his potential without Macedonio. And I think that it's interesting to read about their relationship. I think it's interesting to read what's available translated into English. There's one other collection of Macedonio that's translated so far, but I think this is mostly what you'll find. But I think if you're really interested in Borges and like Alicia Borinsky and Ricardo Piglia and all of these writers that sort of came after and was influenced by Macedonio, the myth of Macedonio that Borges was creating was that of the Socrates of Buenos Aires. He was this philosopher, teacher, who, like the quote said, would come with these striking original thoughts that would seem precious to Borges those moments. Alicia Borinsky was taught by Borges, and when she was saying to him that she was looking into Macedonio's manuscripts, he would talk about Macedonio as maestro or teacher, and he said to Alicia that it was important that they helped create the myth of Macedonio, and that his reputation would survive in that form. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know if you read Macedonio, or if you're also interested in sort of experimental boom and post-boom writers.